2836 Fateless Encryption. Nephis looked at Sunny, while Cassie shifted slightly and faced him. Both waited for what he would say next intently, tension and anticipation written clearly on their usually reserved faces. However, Sunny lingered. He had to think about what to say and how to say it. This matter concerned the tomb of Ariel. After all, it concerned him and his fate, and therefore, most things he could share with them would be immediately forgotten. Beyond that, Sunny had to gather his thoughts first. The answer is oblivion. The phrase had been used to describe the key of the estuary by the Mad Prince. It held several meanings. The first and most obvious of these meanings was the answer to the simplest of questions: who was buried in the tomb of Ariel? The answer was oblivion. The demon of oblivion, who could hardly be remembered by the world, had been entombed in the Great Pyramid after dying a lonesome death, both her passing and her burial forgotten. No one knew how she had died and where her final resting place was, except for Weaver. Weaver, the Mad Prince, and Sunny. In a broader sense, the great tomb had been built by Ariel to help him forget the unbearable truths he wanted to be free of. And then there was the personal meaning the Mad Prince imbued the description of the estuary key with. The Mad Prince had wanted to conquer the third nightmare and escape the tomb of Ariel together with Nephis. But he could not, because his soul had been infected by the defilement, and due to the sin of Solace, he would remember the same forbidden knowledge that had corrupted him at the start of every loop, therefore locking him into an inescapable paradox. Ironically enough, it was the sin of Solace that had prevented him from fully losing himself to corruption, as well. In the end, the Mad Prince had found a way to silence the loathsome apparition and erase his own memories of the defilement by escaping to the next loop while in possession of the estuary key, an impossible memory he had created to fulfill his desperate, dire wish. The true key to his liberation was oblivion. But what did the Mad Prince, the estuary key, and the tomb of Ariel have to do with Astarion? Why had Cassie sent herself this cryptic message? Why is it so cryptic, to begin with? Before considering the content of the message, Sunny thought it prudent to consider its form. Although Cassie was an oracle, or had been, at least, she was under no obligation to deliver her prophecies in a vague and cryptic manner. In fact, that would only be counterproductive. If she had indeed foreseen that Astarion would become a deadly threat once, and even gleaned a strategy to defeat him, she could have just explained it to her future self plainly. Go there, find that, recruit those people, avoid making these decisions, something like that. The message encouraging her to find a man named Sunless and wish him a happy birthday on the day of the winter solstice had been worded quite straightforwardly. This time, however, she had only sent one mysterious sentence. Why? Well, first of all, even though the message had been delivered to Cassie, it was not meant for her. Nephis and Cassie did not know it, but Sunny had immediately realized that he was the intended recipient instead. Because he was the only one who remembered the events that had transpired in the tomb of Ariel clearly, as well as the only one who remembered the description of the key of the estuary. Even if the others had seen it, they were not capable of remembering it. So, then, doesn't that answer my question? Why was the message so cryptic? To make sure that only Sunny could understand its meaning. And why would Cassie only want Sunny to grasp the meaning of her message? Because she didn't want someone else to understand it. It wasn't difficult to realize who it was that had to stay blind to the meaning of Cassie's message at all costs. The Dreamspawn. Astarion knew many things. In fact, his knowledge of all events, both past and present, was eerily systematic. It was unclear whether he could spy on them at that very moment, either. The possibility that he could was high, and even if he couldn't, he would easily glean the significance of this conversation if he or one of his thralls met them face to face one day, and therefore gained access to their innermost thoughts. So, it wasn't surprising at all that Cassie had wanted to keep her message away from the prying eyes of the Dreamspawn. After all, the secret of his downfall was quite possibly contained within it, and therefore, he would do everything in his power to prevent them from acting on this information if he ever found out. Clever. At that moment, Sunny realized one more truth. It was that Astarion was aware of what had transpired in their third nightmare, as well. Or he had been, rather, which meant that now, he could not access these memories fully, just like the rest of the world. Because his memories were obfuscated by the fog of fatality as well. That was another barrier that prevented Astarion from understanding the significance of Cassie's message. So, in conclusion, Cassie had known that Astarion might become a dire adversary of the cohort one day. So, she sent a message to the future Sunny that only he could understand, a message that was meant to help him defeat the Dreamspawn. Nobody else was able to understand the meaning of the message, so even if Astarion intercepted it, it would be of no use to him. On top of that, Sunny had to make sure not to reveal the truth while explaining what they had to do aloud. But what did they have to do, really? He remained silent for a while, considering. The message was not merely a clever puzzle. It was a call to action. Where was it calling Sunny, then? The answer was quite obvious. It was calling him back to the tomb of Ariel. 2837 Ray of Hope. Go back to the tomb of Ariel. Technically, that was an erroneous statement. Sunny had never been inside the tomb of Ariel, after all. Neither had anyone else, no human of the war realm, that was. Astarion had attempted to reach the Great Pyramid once, but failed to overcome the Nightmare Desert and was forced to turn back. What Sunny had visited and endured was the phantom version of the tomb of Ariel conjured by the spell. It was easy to confuse the two, at times, but the distinction was important. So, it wouldn't be correct to say that Cassie had sent a message telling him to go back to the tomb of Ariel. Rather, she was telling him to enter the real tomb of Ariel, for the first time. No wonder the chain breaker had been drifting in the Great River. No wonder that, unlike the other members of the cohort, Sunny and Nephis had taken the roles of themselves in the nightmare, as opposed to the roles of local heroes. No wonder he had met a future version of himself in the estuary. It was all because Sunny and Nephis were going to enter the real tomb of Ariel, and therefore leave their mark on the Grey River. Since the Great River flowed from the future into the past, everyone who had ever entered the Great Pyramid would have been placed into the nightmare by the spell. Darren and his champions had been, and so were Sunny and Nephis. Sunny had always suspected that he would have to visit the tomb of Ariel one day. Now, he knew that the day had come, and that the reason he had to return there had something to do with defeating Astarion. There were several possible reasons he could think of that would make the tomb of Ariel a key to defeating the Dreamspawn, actually. First and foremost, there was the nature of the Great River itself. The Great River was unfathomable and supremely perilous, but it also presented a rare opportunity to anyone who could survive its treacherous currents, an opportunity to escape the confines of time. Ures had told Sunny that he would need hundreds of years to become qualified to attempt apotheosis naturally. In the tomb of Ariel, those hundreds of years could become no longer than a single day, if he was lucky enough. Sadly, he wasn't fated anymore, so there was too much luck involved in that potential plan for Sunny's taste. And speaking of being fated, the tomb of Ariel also held the key to reclaiming his fate. Sunny knew that the vile thieving bird had escaped the collapsing nightmare by stealing his fate and using his connection to the nightmare spell to sneak into the real world. It was most likely still in its nest at the heart of the tomb of Ariel, the real one this time, not an illusion conjured by the spell. And that odious bird still had his stolen fate in its possession. So, if Sunny were to slay the vile thieving bird, chances were that he would be able to reclaim his fate, become fated once again, and be remembered by the world. He would regain his true name and become a carrier of the nightmare spell once more, which would allow him to challenge the fifth nightmare. That was something Sunny had already decided to do, but now, there was an additional reason for him to venture into the tomb of Ariel and face the vile thieving bird. A dire reason, at that. He did not know whether it was the fact of becoming fated itself or the possibility of challenging the nightmare and becoming sacred that was meant to help him defeat Astarion, but both options seemed promising. And lastly, albeit somewhat far-fetched, as far as plans went, there was the vile thieving bird itself. That cursed terror, which had been hated both by the gods and by the beings of the void, had been able to steal his fate. In doing so, it had erased the memories of him, as well as of his name, from the great tapestry of fate, and therefore from everyone's minds. Not only that, but people weren't able to remember their past connection to him, even if he told them repeatedly. And what was Astarion's main source of power? What made his existence possible? It was people knowing about him and remembering his name. It was the propagation of the idea of him across countless minds, which were the foundation of both his existence and his domain. Sunny had been torn and heartbroken when he lost his fate and was forgotten by everyone. But Astarion, if they managed to get the vile thieving bird to steal Astarion's fate, somehow, he would not be just hurt. He would simply cease to exist, since he was nothing more and nothing less than a living, infectious, malevolent idea. Granted, Sunny had no clue how to make a cursed terror do something he wanted it to do, let alone steal something from his enemy. These were three possible reasons Cassie had wanted him to return to the tomb of Ariel. Any of them could become the key to destroying Astarion, and he was not limited to achieving just one, either. He had always been aware of these facts, but without Cassie's prophetic encouragement, the possibility of a victory never seemed assured enough to take on the dire risk of venturing into the tomb of Ariel, not while the plague of Astarion was rampaging across the worlds, at least. Now that the blind oracle had pointed at the tomb of Ariel and the best solution available to them, however, the equation changed completely. Her message added weight to the ethereal possibility of success. So, I have to go to the tomb of Ariel, face the thieving bird, and reclaim my fate. None of these tasks was easy. To begin with, reaching the real tomb of Ariel was almost impossible. Sunny suspected that one could only draw closer to it at night, and at night, the Nightmare Desert became the battlefield where two dead armies from the Doom War continued their eternal fight, destroying anyone who was foolish and unfortunate enough to get in the way of their terrifying battle. The situation inside the real tomb of Ariel was also unclear. It could look exactly as what they had witnessed in the third nightmare, or it could be completely different. There could be a thriving civilization hidden there, although Sunny strongly doubted it, but the Great River could turn out to be completely infested by the First Seeker and the Defilement as well. The whole Great Pyramid could be filled entirely by the endless mass of corrupted flesh, or something even more ghastly. Imagining that, Sunny could not help but shiver. Finally, even if they did make it to the heart of the estuary, there remained the prospect of facing the vile thieving bird in combat. A cursed terror would be the strongest enemy either Sunny or Nephis had ever faced, by far. There was simply no comparison, considering how vast the gap between the high classes and the rest of nightmare creatures was. The cursed ones, in general, were harrowing foes. After all, abjuration had almost annihilated all of humanity while fighting Nephis, and that fiend was not even in the same category as the vile thieving bird. That damn bird had stolen Weaver's eye and lived to tell the tale, no less. Still, Cassie's message was the first ray of hope in the hopeless, vile war against Astarion. And despite everything that had transpired between them in the past, Sunny trusted her to have had their best interest in mind. In fact, he simply trusted her. So, if her message was calling him to the tomb of Ariel, he was inclined to answer that call. It is, finally time to reclaim my fate. The answer was oblivion. It was time for Sunny to escape oblivion and be remembered again. 2838 Changing Stars Favor. Sunny must have been silent for too long, because Nephis shifted and opened her mouth, clearly intending to ask him for an explanation. That would have been problematic, since explaining the meaning of Cassie's message aloud would risk revealing that information to Astarion. If Sunny and Nephis were really going to challenge the Nightmare Desert, invade the tomb of Ariel, and face a cursed terror in battle, then their task was already so perilous that describing it as absolutely fatal would be an understatement. Trying to achieve these feats while also being thwarted by the Dreamspawn would reduce their chances of success to zero. Apart from that, it would be difficult to explain everything in a way that would allow her to remember, or perhaps even impossible. So, Sunny spoke before Nephis could voice her question. I know what it means, but I can't tell you yet. Nephis frowned. Cassie seemed dissatisfied with his answer, as well. However, she knew the burden of knowledge better than anyone, so she did not insist on getting a clear explanation. Instead, she inhaled deeply, and then asked in a measured tone. If you know what it means, do you know what must be done, as well? Sunny nodded. She hesitated for a moment. So what do we have to do? Sunny remained silent for a long while, then turned to Nephis. I guess, first and foremost, you have to trust me. Can you do that? It was an important question. Nephis trusted Sunny, lost from light, implicitly. But did she trust Sunless, the Lord of Shadows, just as much? The two of them had faced and defeated the Sovereigns together. They were partners, companions, and lovers. Yet still, the nature of their connection was shallower than the bond between Changing Star and Lost from Light had been. Nephis smiled faintly. Sunny, if I don't trust you, who can I trust? He chuckled quietly. That was the correct answer. I am the most honest person in the world, after all. She shook her head and took a sip of the tea he had brewed for her. Just out of curiosity, what were you going to do if I said no? Sunny coughed. Well, you'd probably be sleeping on the couch for a few days. Or weeks. We don't really have a couch, I guess, so I would have had to craft one first, but yeah. That's what I was going to do. He smiled and shook his head. But first, I would have reminded you that you owe me a favor, don't you remember? Back when you came to recruit the Lord of Shadows, the price I demanded was that you would do me a favor at a later date. That date is today. Nephis blinked a few times. You remember that? Sunny laughed. Of course, I do. That was quite a memorable day for me. You can't imagine how long I had waited for Changing Star to come pay me a visit, I mean, in a not creepy way. Both women regarded him silently. Why did they look so doubtful? Sunny hid his face behind his cup. Eventually, Nefis shook her head, hiding a smile. Well, it was a memorable day for me, too. She paused for a moment, and then asked. So, what kind of favor do you have in mind? Sunny leaned back and shrugged. Oh, it's nothing much. I just need you to help me subjugate a death zone or two, defeat a cursed terror, and reclaim something that I lost a long time ago. Nefis stared at him silently for a few seconds, then tilted her head slightly. Quote. Nothing much, huh? Sunny nodded. Oh, and I also need you to trust me implicitly and not ask any questions. This time, it was Cassie who spoke, her tone incredulous. You want Nefis to follow you into a battle against a cursed terror without asking any questions? Sunny opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, Nefis said evenly. I'll do it. He glanced at her, not knowing what to say. Nefis shrugged. I do owe you a favor, after all. Even if fulfilling my promise would technically make you the most expensive sellsword in the history of mankind. She smiled. But what to do? My taste in men is that extravagant. Nefis glanced at him and asked quietly. Will Tgustingu help us defeat the Dreamspawn? Sunny nodded slowly. I believe that it will. She smiled. Then there's no reason to hesitate. Nefis paused for a moment, and then added. All this time, we've been watching the human domain crumble slowly while fruitlessly searching for a way to defeat the Dreamspawn without devastating half of humanity. Now, Cassie delivered us the solution we had so desperately sought. It doesn't matter if we have to fight a cursed terror or not. It doesn't matter how many death zones we must subjugate. As long as there is a chance of saving the human domain from the jaws of the Dreamspawn, I am willing to try. Sunny remained silent for a while. In the end, he said evenly. Then it is decided. However, this will be a challenge unlike any other we've ever faced. He glanced at Nefis somberly. We won't be able to overcome it with half-hearted measures. Do you understand what I mean? Nefis met his gaze and nodded. It means that both of us will have to commit to this expedition completely. Indeed, at the moment, the human domain was slowly being consumed by the plague of Astarion. More and more people became his thralls, and soon enough, he would gain control of all of humanity. Before that happened, though, those who had already been swallowed by the hunger domain would most likely endeavor to capture or eliminate those who did not. There was already tumult and unrest among the people, and the situation would only continue to worsen as time went by. Nef's presence was especially important right now. She had to keep herself visible to her people more than ever, serving as a symbol of strength and resolve, of hope. If she suddenly disappeared, not only would she be unable to solve any emerging calamities, but she would also undermine the human domain with her absence, hastening the spread of the plague. The same logic applied to Sunny, even if he was hidden from the public eye. The task in front of him was far too difficult, far too harrowing. It was more perilous by far than getting lost in Ariel's game, entering the Great Mirror, and laying siege to the Eternal City, so, he would not be able to complete it by only sending a few of his incarnations and holding much of his power back. If he were to have a hope of defeating the vile thieving bird, he would have to send all of his incarnations into battle, as well as all of the Shadow Legion. That meant leaving the people he cherished unprotected while a mad sovereign was prowling nearby. But it was also his best chance of ultimately saving them from the Dreamspawn. Sunny sighed. We'll have to prepare thoroughly, but also swiftly. Nefis finished her tea and rose to her feet. Then there is no time to waste.